The first thing you should know. I did not go into the woods alone. This is important, because by the end, the police reports, the news articles, the whispered theories at the grocery store, they all got it wrong. They painted a picture of a reckless woman, a city dweller with more trauma than sense, chasing some nebulous concept of healing into the untamed wilds of the North Cascades. Alice Kincaid, 32, ventured solo into the Gifford Creek Valley on October 17. But that's not how it started. I went with my brother, Leo. He was the one with the sense, the compass, the bear spray, the encyclopedic knowledge of cloud formations and edible mushrooms. I was the raw nerd, the one he was trying to solder back together after a year that had hollowed me out. A bad end to a worse relationship, the kind that leaves fingerprints on your soul, followed by the death of our mother, the good parent, the anchor. Leo, 2 years older, had borne it with a quiet, sturdy grief. I had shattered. 3 days, he'd said, spreading the USGS topo map on my kitchen table, a table still littered with unopened condolence cards and empty wine bottles. The Gifford Creek Loop, it's quiet this time of year. No people, just trees, air, maybe some early snow up high. It'll burn the bad stuff out. He meant well. He always did. And I, a puppet with cut strings, nodded. The act of packing, laying out the merino wool base layers, the broken-in boots, checking the headlamp batteries, felt like an out-of-body experience. I was going through the motions of being Alice. We drove east from Seattle, the evergreen giants slowly swallowing the world, the chatter of the city fading into the white noise of tires on wet asphalt. The trailhead was deserted, just a dirt pull-off and a weathered sign. Gifford Creek Trail number 707 entering Alpine Lakes Wilderness. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth and decaying leaves, a scent that went straight to the primitive core of the brain. It was October 17th, a Thursday. The sky was the color of a bruise. Leo shouldered the heavier pack, gave me a grin that didn't quite reach his worried eyes. All right, kiddo, walk it off. The first few miles were a pleasant, if strenuous, anesthesia. The forest was a cathedral of Douglas fir and western hemlock, shafts of pallid light piercing the canopy to illuminate swirling motes of pollen and mist. Our breath plumed in the air. The only sounds were our boots on the needle-strewn path, the distant rush of Gifford Creek, and the occasional scold of a Steller's jay. We spoke little. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was a blanket. For the first time in months, the static in my head began to recede, replaced by the simple, exhausting metric of putting one foot in front of the other. We made camp as dusk bled the last color from the world. A designated site near the creek, with a stone fire ring and a flat spot for the tent. Leo built a small, efficient fire. We ate rehydrated chili, and the warmth in my belly felt alien and good. That night, curled in my sleeping bag listening to Leo's steady breathing and the endless whisper of the creek, I felt a fragile seedling of peace. The woods were vast, but they were simple. They held no memories of him, of her, of loss. They just were. The second day, the trail began to climb in earnest, leaving the creek valley for a ridge of scraggly subalpine fir. The trees grew shorter, more twisted. The wind picked up, a constant, sighing presence. We stopped for lunch on a rocky outcrop, looking back the way we'd come. The valley was a sea of green, fading to blue in the distance. Map says the trail forks about a mile ahead, Leo said, tracing the line with a grimy finger. Left goes down to Upper Gifford Lake, where we camped tonight. Right is an old spur, looks like it peters out near some cliffs. Not maintained. I nodded, chewing on jerky. So we go left. We go left, he confirmed. But an hour later, at the fort, the decision was taken from us. The left-hand trail, our path, was blocked. Not by a fallen tree, but by a collapse. A whole section of the hillside had given way, a raw, muddy scar littered with shattered rock and uprooted ferns. It was recent. The earth was still dark and moist, and the smell of ruptured soil was overwhelming. To attempt a crossing would be to invite a landslide onto our heads. Leo cursed softly, studying the map. Shit, okay. We can't go back the whole way, not with our supplies. This spur, he pointed to the right-hand path, narrower, overgrown with huckleberry and devil's club. It hooks around this bluff. Might reconnect farther down the lake's shore. If not, we find a spot to camp near the water and bushwhack back to the main trail in the morning. It'll be tough, but it's doable. A prickle of unease, cold and sharp, traced my spine. The right-hand trail didn't look like a trail. It looked like the forest had decided to close a door. The branches formed a low, tangled arch, dripping with moisture. But Leo was already adjusting his pack straps, his face set in that determined, problem-solving mode. "You sure?" My voice sounded small. "Trust me," he said, and flashed a brotherly grin. "Worst case, we have an adventure to tell." We stepped into the green gloom. The forest changed almost immediately. The air grew still and thick. The sound of the wind vanished, swallowed by the dense undergrowth. Our boots sank into a deep carpet of moss that muffled our footsteps. The trees here were different. Ancient, enormous cedars, their trunks furrowed like the faces of old giants, draped with beards of lichen that stirred in no breeze. The light took on a submarine quality, green and murky. We walked for what felt like hours, but the map's promised spur seemed to have no end, nor any sign of hooking back toward the lake. The terrain began to slope downwards, not sharply, but insistently, pulling us deeper into a ravine the map didn't show. "This can't be right," Leo muttered, stopping to consult his compass. He tapped it. The needle spun lazily, then settled, pointing not north, but directly ahead, down the slope. He frowned, smacking the device against his palm. The needle jittered, then steadfastly refused to obey the laws of magnetism. What the hell? The first stone happened then. It was small, about the size of a golf ball. It arced out of the trees to our left and struck a cedar trunk beside Leo's head with a sharp crack. We both froze. "Hello," Leo called, his voice swallowed by the moss. "Who's there?" Silence. "Probably a squirrel," I said, the words hollow. "Squirrels don't throw rocks." We moved on, quicker now. The second stone came 5 minutes later, from the right this time, clipping my backpack with a soft thump. I yelped. Leo's face was pale. "Okay, we're going back. Now." But when we turned, the path behind us was unclear. The deep moss showed no discernible footprints. The wall of vegetation looked uniform in every direction. The subtle trail we'd been following had vanished. Panic, a cold, greasy wave, washed over me. "Leo, it's here," he said, voice tight. "It has to be." He led, pushing through a thicket of salal. I followed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The third stone was bigger, a fist-sized chunk of granite. It hit Leo square between the shoulder blades. He grunted in pain and stumbled. That's when we heard the giggle. It was high-pitched, but not childish. It was wet, gurgling, as if its owner was choking on mud. It came from above us, from the tangled canopy. We looked up. I saw nothing but lichen and shadow. But I felt a presence. A watching. "Run!" Leo breathed. We ran. We crashed through the undergrowth, no longer caring about direction, only about away. Branches whipped our faces, thorns tore at our clothes. The forest was no longer a cathedral, it was a labyrinth, and we were mice. The giggling followed us, skipping from tree to tree, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, sometimes to the side. It was joined by other sounds. A skittering like claws on bark, a heavy, dragging shuffle, the snap of twigs from multiple directions. We burst into a small clearing, gasping for air. In the center was a stump, not cut by any saw, but splintered and twisted, as if the tree had been violently ripped from the earth. On the stump sat a ring of mushrooms, fly agaric, bright red with white spots, perfectly arranged. Leo bent over, hands on his knees. We need to stop. Get our bearings. It's playing with us, I whispered, my eyes darting to the tree line. Before he could answer, a new sound cut through the oppressive quiet. A voice. It was faint, distorted by distance and the trees, but unmistakably human. Hello. Is someone out there? A woman's voice, tinged with fear. Hope, fierce and desperate, lanced through my terror. Hello. I screamed. We're here. We're lost. This way. The voice called, clearer now. Toward the water. The sound seemed to come from our left, down the slope. Toward where the lake should be. Leo hesitated, his eyes dark with suspicion. Alice, wait. But I was already moving, stumbling toward the sound of salvation. Another human. We weren't alone. The giggling in the trees had stopped. Come on. Reluctantly, he followed. The voice called again, guiding us. Keep coming. I'm by the shore. The trees began to thin. I saw a flash of gray through the trunks. Water. The lake. We pushed through a final curtain of pine maple and emerged onto a rocky, narrow beach. Upper Gifford Lake was a sheet of hammered lead under the low sky. It was smaller than I'd imagined, rimmed by steep, forested slopes that plunged straight into the dark water. The air was even colder here, and utterly still. There was no sign of another person. Hello. My voice echoed flatly across the water. No answer. Leo grabbed my arm. There's no one here. But the voice. We both saw it at the same time. On the far shore, maybe 200 yards away, a figure stood among the trees. It was indistinct, a gray smudge against the green. It didn't move, it just watched. Hey, Leo shouted, cupping his hands around his mouth. We need help. Can you get to us? The figure remained motionless. Then, from the trees directly behind us, the woman's voice again, now a whisper right at our ears. I'm right here. New world. There was nothing but forest. A stone whizzed past my face, so close I felt the air part. Then another, and another. A hailstorm of pebbles and dirt rained from the canopy above our little beach. We were under attack from the air itself. Into the trees, Leo yelled, shoving me back toward the forest edge. But as we turned, the figure from the far shore was gone. In its place, standing knee-deep in the water just 10 feet from where we stood, was a man. He was gaunt, dressed in tattered, old-fashioned woolen slick with lake water and slime. His hair was a matted nest. His skin was the color of a fish's belly, and his eyes were wide, milky orbs that saw nothing and everything. Water streamed from his clothes, but he made no sound. He held a long, whippy branch in one hand, sharpened to a point at one end. He opened his mouth. A stream of murky water and blackened leaves dribbled out. The sound that followed was not a voice, but a perfect, chilling mimicry of Leo's own. It's here. It has to be. Leo froze, utter horror dawning on his face. The thing in the water took a step forward. That's when the forest behind us erupted. Not with stones, but with them. Some were skeletal, clothed in rags of moss and bark. Others were denser, lumpen forms of clay and wet rock, with stones for eyes and mushroom caps sprouting from their shoulders. They moved with a jerky, wrong grace. Their mouths were dark holes. And they all giggled. That same wet, choking sound, now a chorus. The thing in the water raised its spear. "Run, Alice!" Leo screamed, finding his voice. He didn't say which way. There was no which way. He grabbed the bear spray from his belt, ripped off the safety tab, and unleashed a furious cloud of capsicum at the advancing shore thing. It hissed, a sound like steam escaping a rotten log, and stumbled back. The lake, I screamed. It was the only open space. No. Into the trees, straight up. Go. Go. He shoved me hard toward the steep slope at the head of the beach. I scrambled, grabbing roots, tearing my hands on rock. I heard the hiss of the spray again, a sickening thud, and Leo's cry of pain. I looked back. He was on his knees. The shore thing had him by the ankle, its grip like a root. The others from the forest were closing in, a shambling half circle. Leo met my eyes. His were wide with terror, but his mouth was a firm line. "Don't stop," he roared. "Don't look back. Find the high ground, Al. Find the sun." Then he did something unimaginable. He turned, wrapped his arms around the leg of the shore thing, and with a final, desperate heave, pulled both himself and the creature into the deep, black water of the lake. They vanished with a sucking gurgle. The forest things shrieked, a sound of broken glass and tearing roots, and slithered after them, pouring into the lake like a flood of earth and decay. I was alone. For a second, I was paralyzed, staring at the rings expanding on the water's surface. Then the instinct he commanded took over. "Don't stop." Asterisk. I turned and ran. I clawed my way up the near vertical slope, dirt and rocks giving way under my hands. I didn't think. I didn't feel. I was pure animal flight. I reached a ledge, hauled myself over, and ran blindly into the forest, away from the lake, away from the beach, away from the place where my brother had vanished. I ran until my lungs were fire and my legs were jelly. I collapsed at the base of another enormous cedar, in a hollow formed by its great roots. I shoved myself deep into the earthy darkness, pulling fronds of fern over the opening. I curled into a ball, my hands clamped over my mouth to stifle the sobs that racked my body. Leo was gone. The thought was an iceberg in my gut. Leo, who remembered to pack extra socks. Leo, who could tie a dozen different knots. Leo, who had taken me hiking when I was 6 and carried me on his back when I got tired. Gone. Pulled under by a thing that wore his voice. The light faded from green to gray to black. Night fell, absolute and impenetrable. The silence returned, but it was a different silence now. It was a listening silence. A hungry silence. In the root cellar darkness, I heard them return. Not splashing from the lake, but rising from the ground itself, from the rotting heart of the forest. Soft shuffles. The creak of bending wood. The wet pop of a mushroom cap unfolding. And the whispers. They weren't in any language I knew, but I understood their intent. They were discussing, searching. The other. Warm. Not gone. In the stone. In the root. Find. They passed so close to my hiding place I could smell them. The scent of cold soil, of stagnant water, of fungus and forgotten things. I held my breath until spots danced before my eyes. Hours passed. The forest was never truly still. It breathed. It shifted. Once, a face of knotted wood and luminous lichen pressed against the opening of my root hollow. Milky, pupil-less eyes scanned the darkness inches from my own. I felt its gaze like a physical coldness. It lingered, sniffed, a sound like leaves rustling. Then it moved on. Dawn came as a reluctant seep of gray light. I was stiff, frozen, my mind a scoured blank. The memory of the previous afternoon was a nightmare I couldn't wake from. But the fear was fresh and vital. It had kept me alive through the night. I had to move. I had to get out. Crawling from my hollow, I saw the forest with new eyes. It was no longer wilderness. It was occupied territory. Every strange tree formation, a pair that grew entwined, one that split into three like grasping fingers, looked intentional. Menacing. The cheerful red of a huckleberry bush seemed a lurid trap. The beautiful, feathery lichens were now the forest's mold, its spreading decay. I had no path, no food, no water, no compass, no brother. I had the clothes on my back, a pocket knife, and a lighter in my jeans pocket. And I had Leo's last command: find the high ground. Find the sun. Asterisk. The sky was a uniform, low gray, offering no hint of direction. But the slope seemed to rise to my left. I started walking, moving as quietly as I could, avoiding dry twigs, placing my feet with deliberate care. I was no longer Alice Kincaid, grieving sister. I was prey, and prey must be silent. I found water around midday, a thin, clear trickle running over mossy stone. I drank greedily, ignoring the primal fear that it might be tainted. I needed to think. The collapse had blocked the main trail. The spur had led us here, to this place. I had to assume that things controlled the low ground, the lake, the ravine. High ground was my only chance. As I drank, I saw the first sign. It was a cairn, a small stack of stones, but unlike any trail marker I'd ever seen. The stones were stacked in an unstable-looking spiral, and at the top was a crow's skull, picked clean and white. It faced up the slope. A marker, or a warning. Further up, I found another. This one had a patch of those red fly agate mushrooms growing in a perfect circle around its base. The message was not one of welcome. The forest was thinning, the trees growing stunted and wind sculpted. I was nearing the tree line. The air grew colder, sharper. A light rain began to fall, a freezing mist that coated everything in a slick, silver sheen. I crested a rise and stopped, my breath catching. Before me was a high, rocky basin, a bowl carved by ancient ice. At its center lay a small, perfectly circular tarn, black as obsidian. And surrounding it, standing in silent, concentric rings, were figures. They were made of stone and wood and packed earth, roughly human-shaped but utterly still. Sentinels. Some were crude, little more than stacked rocks with branches for arms. Others were more elaborate, woven from roots and vines into shapes that hinted at twisted limbs and screaming mouths. They all faced the tarn. This was a place of significance. A temple, or a larder. I ducked behind a boulder, my heart hammering. I couldn't go through there. I'd have to skirt the basin along the rocky, exposed ridge. As I began to edge my way along the steep side, my foot dislodged a shale slide. The clatter of stones was catastrophically loud in the silent basin. One of the nearer figures, a tall, slender thing woven from dark stained roots, turned its head. Not a statue. A guardian. It didn't move its body. Its head simply rotated on its shoulders like an owl's, a full 180 degrees, to stare directly at my hiding place. Where its face should have been was a smooth plate of polished, black river stone. A low hum began to emanate from the circle of figures, a vibration I felt in my teeth. The black water of the tarn rippled, though there was no wind. I ran. I scrambled along the ridge, no longer caring about stealth, only distance. I heard no pursuit, but I felt a pressure, a focus, like the entire basin was now a single, malevolent eye trained on my fleeing back. I ran until the ground fell away in a sheer cliff, forcing me to stop. I was at the edge of the world. Below was a dizzying drop into a fog-shrouded valley. To my left, the ridge continued, but it narrowed to a knife edge, slit with the freezing rain. To my right, the cliff face curved back, offering a possible, terrifying descent. The choice was taken from me. From the direction of the basin, I heard it. The skittering, dragging gait of the blue figure, moving fast over the rocks. There was no time. The cliff descent was suicide. The knife-edge ridge was my only hope. I stepped out onto it. The wind, which had been still, now gusted, trying to pluck me from the rock. The stone was wet and smooth. I dropped to my hands and knees, crawling like an insect, pressing my body against the cold stone. I didn't look down. I didn't look back. Inch by agonizing inch. Halfway across, I heard it reach the ledge behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I kept crawling. A sound. A dry, rattling exhalation, like seeds in a gourd. Then a thump, and a skittering, coming closer. It was on the ridge with me. I risked a glance back. It was moving on all fours, its root limbs finding purchase with terrifying, spider-like certainty. It was gaining fast. Despair flooded me. This was it. I would die here, on this rock, and my bones would join the cairns. Then my hand, searching for the next hold, touched something that wasn't stone. It was cold, smooth, and metallic. A piton. An old, rusted climbing piton, driven deep into a crack in the ridge. And just beyond it, the ridge widened into a small, sheltered ledge. And on that ledge was a faded orange rectangle, a piece of torn tent fabric, snagged on a rock. A sign of people, real people. With a final, sobbing heave, I dragged myself onto the ledge and rolled against the cliff face. The root creature stopped at the edge of the narrows. It didn't follow. It crouched there, its black stone face reflecting the bleak sky. It seemed hesitant, almost respectful of this boundary. It watched me for a long moment, then slowly backed away, vanishing the way it had come. I lay on the ledge, shaking with adrenaline and relief. I'd found a place they wouldn't, or couldn't, follow. But why? Because of the piton. The tent scrap. I pulled the scrap of orange nylon free. It was brittle with age. Beneath it, scratched into the rock face, were words. J. and M. Read. September 12th. Went for water. Didn't come back. Don't trust the voices. Head for the break in the cliffs due west. God help us. Asterisk. The writing was frenzied, carved with what looked like a knife tip. A final testament. I wasn't the first to be hunted here. The realization was both horrifying and perversely comforting. I wasn't going mad. This was real. This had happened before. I looked up. The cloud cover was breaking, patches of sickly yellow light showing through. I could see the sun's diffuse location. West. The note said to head for a break in the cliffs due west. I had a direction. I had a fragment of a plan. And I had the chilling knowledge that the things in the woods had been playing this game long before I arrived. Gathering the last of my strength, I pushed myself upright. The ledge led to a scree slope that tumbled down into a new stand of forest, older and darker than any I'd seen yet. Somewhere in that direction was a break in the cliffs. An exit. As I began my descent, a sound drifted up from the depths below. It was the woman's voice again, the one that had called us to the lake. Now it was soft, pleading, laced with a perfect imitation of human despair. Help me, please, I'm over here, I'm so cold, asterisk. I clenched my jaw, my fingers tightening around the scrap of orange tent fabric. I remembered the reeds. Don't trust the voices. Asterisk. I turned my face toward the weak, western light, and started down into the gloom, leaving the ghostly plea to fade unanswered among the silent, waiting trees. The hunt was not over. It had only just begun. And somewhere in the dark heart of this place, my brother was waiting. Not as Leo, not anymore, but as something else, something that knew my name. I had to find him before he found me. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment and turn on notifications if you enjoyed the video so you never miss an upload.